I originally started this topic on the Ozempic craze. Everyone in Hollywood is using it, but when I read the side effects like thyroid tumors and cancer, inflammation of your pancreas, and kidney problems, I sat back to watch what would become of it. One day on TikTok, I found Marisa Faye Wellness speaking about the natural alternative to Ozempic, berberine. Since then, so much more information has become available on berberine, Ozempic, and many other supplements, naturopathics, and how our food affects us. So I went to Marisa to get the real on all of it. Now, let's get to business. Hello, everyone. I am your host, Tatiana Ryan, and this is the Businessy Podcast. And today I have with me Marisa Faye of Marisa Faye Wellness. She is a functional medicine and holistic nutritionist, and she deals with all the things that we have been seeing all over the internet and in Hollywood. We have so many questions, and she is going to answer them. How are you today, Marisa?
I am good, thanks. I'm so glad to be here.
Oh, thank you so much for doing this, because I think we all have a lot of questions and we keep seeing everything on TikTok and then we're like, oh, well, I heard this and I heard that. And I want you to clear all of this up.
I am here for it.
Good. Well, you started out your functional medicine journey by yourself with an issue that you had. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, I'm one of those people who's very naturally curious. And also I've just never been comfortable necessarily putting my fate in other people's hands, And so I grew up with all kinds of, what at the time was mysterious health issues, right? And what I now know was just severe hormone and gut health issues and experiences of stress at a young age. But when I was in my early 20s, I was like, okay, I'm going to do this, right? I'm going to get myself feeling better. And actually in undergrad, I started taking on the side nutrition classes. I was a communication major and I was like, I need to learn more about this to get better. So I'm just going to all of a sudden take nutrition classes. And, that really started me on this quest to start changing my habits to be healthier. And I did all of the stereotypical things that we hear of as health that are actually dieting. And, we kind of confuse those two. So I started restricting my calories. I started doing a ton of cardio and, some things in my body responded. And I feel like, my primary care doctor was happy because I lost weight, right? But I, over time, felt worse and worse and worse. And I was like, something is not right here, truly. And, through the course of my early 20s, I started working in a wellness center, actually, and managing a wellness center. And I was starting to be exposed to all of these different alternative ideas about what health was, which it's almost like alternative in quotes because it's not actually alternative. That's the original medicine. What we do now and call Western medicine, that's the alternative. And it just made me more curious, right? And so I started just knocking on every door I could of every kind of practitioner to try to give me answers. And at that point, I was diagnosed with hypothyroidism. I was diagnosed with PCOS. And I was probably diagnosed with 3 other things, right? Because they just love to slap a label on you. And in that process, I really thought diagnosis was going to give me relief, right? Like, oh, now I know what this is, so I can do something about it. And in some ways, I almost feel like it misdirected me a bit. But through that process, and frankly, being let down by Western medicine providers as much as functional and holistic and alternative providers, because everybody was trying to say, oh, I have this one thing you can do. I have this one pill you can take, this one supplement, this one dietary change, this one exercise program. Everybody had one thing that they were like, if you change this one thing, it's going to solve problems. And guess what? One thing does not solve a systemic problem, which all of these kinds of hormone issues that women are experiencing nowadays and that I was experiencing back then, that's not a one thing fix, right? It's you got to change things about your life. And that really sent me down a whole other path with my career and my own healing that has led me to where I am now.
It is absolutely amazing that you delved and went on so many different paths to find this, because we see that Western medicine, as you had said, is predominantly maybe geared more towards males than it is females. And we're just getting up to speed to really getting scientifically into how the woman's body works. Mm-hmm. In your 6 years of working with people and their hormones and women and their hormones, because it isn't just a women's issue, it is also a male's issue also. But how do you see the knowledge of how food and diet do actually work with your body?
Yeah, I love that question. And I want to give people a little context too, because you're right that like Western medicine has really taken things that apply to male physiology and tried to apply that to female physiology. And what a lot of people don't realize is they actually didn't start studying females until the 90s. That's pretty recent, right? Like that we're starting to look at females. And guess what? Why they didn't study females was because there were too many potential factors that could change what the study outcome was. Those too many factors, by the way, are hormones. That's what it is, right? So it's like we've tried to apply not only what studies suggest works for males, but also what works in emergency medicine situations. We've tried to apply it to preventative care and for long-term care and for long-term kind of chronic disease management. And it's not a one-to-one, right? There are things we might do in an emergency that could make sense because we're literally trying to save your life. And so how this affects you a year from now really doesn't matter if you're not here, right? But then if we're actually trying to help you live a long, healthy life, that's not exactly the way to go about it. And it's really interesting because, Western medicine has for a long time denied how much food quality and the types of food that you eat impact your health. I literally was just messaging with a client this morning who, she's a new client. She went to her primary care provider, a new doctor, and immediately the doctor told her she had to lose weight. And she was like, well, hang on. I'm working with a nutritionist now. Here's the plan she has me on. She wanted to show her the plan. Here's how it's going. Here's how I'm feeling. And that doctor could care less. They just said, nope, you need to lose weight. That's all I care about. And it's like, there's so much more to the picture here. And when bodies gain weight and retain weight, there's a reason. It's not the weight as the root of the problem. There's something else going on, and the weight is a symptom. And really, when we look at how our food system has changed and evolved, and especially in the United States, the way that lobbyist groups and our government have gotten involved in what we're eating has actually over time made us less healthy as opposed to more healthy. And we have really known how important diet was for a long time. There's an amazing book called The Big Fat Surprise by this incredible journalist who really went deep and studied, what happened way back when with cholesterol, demonizing cholesterol and different dietary approaches to it. And, I want to say the 1960s, although I may have the decade slightly wrong, but there was a whole movement with like heart disease increasing. And they said, well, we're going to put you on they called it the prudent diet actually. And it was like the white food diet, right? Like egg whites, chicken breasts, like all of those things. Be afraid of fat, be afraid of, all of these different foods. We need margarine, we need all these processed things. And they actually saw the outcomes as far as lifespan get worse from that diet, but they covered it up. Right. And so we've known, and many cultures well beyond us have known how important food is. It's just that we have really, especially as far as women are concerned, we've really confused what a healthy diet and healthy foods are with what helps you to be small. And food is such an incredibly powerful tool to help your body feel safe, to balance your body, to improve your health. It really I will say it's not the only factor, right? That's really important to say, but it is a huge potential contributor to you really feeling your best and living your best life or not. And what surprises most people is it's not actually the diet you think that's going to lead to your long-term kind of good health. It's not like eat just only vegetables. It's not eat just only this food, eat just only that food. It's actually really about balance. And that's hard to hold, right? That whole moderation of just high quality things.
Now, you have a lot of letters after your name that go into you being able to do things like pull blood and read that blood work and be able to work with a client on that basis.
Yeah, I do. And, there are all kinds of labs I run. So blood work is not the only one. I run a lot of comprehensive stool tests. I run a lot of more in-depth hormone panels because blood isn't always the best way to look at certain hormones, depending on your life stage or what hormones we want to look at. And this is the piece where lab work oftentimes is a really important piece of the puzzle. And I try to teach women kind of like this pathway. I have this free training that like shows them what this pathway is, but it's like, yes, first make some sound dietary changes, first make some good habit changes. And then when you get to the point where like those things have really shifted as much as they can, then it is usually time to look at lab work. And when I'm looking at lab work, I'm looking for what is functionally optimal. It's very different than what somebody trained in Western medicine is looking for. And kind of a fun fact is blood work, when you get your labs back from your doctor and something's marked like high, it's like in red, right? Alarming. When it shows up high or something shows up low, that's actually the lab marking you and saying you're an extreme outlier from our average population. It actually, there's nothing about that continuum they have and what they mark as high and what they mark as low that actually necessarily correlates to what truly is healthy. It's just them saying your number is really, really different from what we tend to see.
That's very interesting that you said that.
Yeah.
And that kind of maybe like red flags you for, okay, let's put you on this pharmaceutical. Let's get you to this. Yeah, okay.
Yep, exactly. And it's interesting because I've had clients, and I've done this myself with doctors in the past, where I'll go in with that blood work and I'm always interested to hear their perspective, right? Mm-hmm. And they'll be like, oh, this is high, so you might want to consider this medication. This would happen to me years ago. It doesn't happen anymore. Mm-hmm. And I would be like, okay, why? Like, what does that mean? What is that medication really going to do? You don't usually have a good answer. Yeah.
They did not like you after that.
No. Oh my God. No, I was like number one on the like shit list.
Well, that leads me to my next question is when you start taking these things into your own hands and you're looking for that holistic practitioner, there are so many Sherpas out there that are like, oh, come do this, come on the mountain with me. What is it that you are looking for when you are taking that path?
Yeah, it's such a good question. So one thing is there is really no great standardization across the board as far as credentials or certifications go, which, a lot of us want to believe there's truly not. I've had so many people come to see me who worked with a functional medicine doctor, an MD, and they thought this has got to be the person with the best credentials who knows the most. And what that person was doing was greenwashing. They were, instead of a prescription medication, they were giving a supplement, and they weren't teaching them anything about the habits they needed to change, about all these other factors they needed to work on, about what was in their home that could be making them sick, about what their lab work meant. There was like all these things that would be missing. So unfortunately, there's no standardization that one particular credential, one particular degree, one particular anything means anything. That said, I think it's important to have somebody who is not just guiding you based on their personal experience. I see a lot of that. I see a lot of, especially women, they're usually very slender because it's easy to market that they know what they're doing, right? But it's just genetics usually. And so you want somebody who has studied, right? Some path, they've studied some path, they've put a lot of time and energy into learning. That's critical. I think if you have something more beyond just like, I want a healthier diet, you want somebody who has experience, right? Like I have been doing this work 7 years, almost more than that. And before that, right, I was my own case study. So I have all those years of my own case study, but then I have all these years in clinical practice. And for much of my practice, I was working one-on-one with women. So really in the weeds with women. It's only been in recent years that I've expanded to things where I'm doing more group stuff and courses and things like that, which means that I gained a lot of experience from that one-on-one work, a big variety of learning bodies and what they need. And I think that's really important if you have something more advanced going on, to look for somebody who truly does have clinical experience, right? They've worked with a variety of women. They kind of understand more beyond, not kind of, they understand more beyond just like diet, right? They have more to offer you than just what to eat and what not to eat. And also, I really do think practitioners who are giving advice on supplements who don't look at lab work and can't look at lab work, that's a red flag to me, because supplements, just like medications, come with side effects, come with drawbacks. They're not right for everybody. They're not even right for, they could work for you now and not be right for you in 3 years, right? It's very, very nuanced. And I think it can be kind of dangerous to randomly just work with someone because, oh, they fell across your TikTok, or, oh, they look good, right? So you want to look for somebody who can talk the talk, walk the walk, and has the experience, if that's really what your body is needing, which frankly, if you are a woman with a profound amount of symptoms and you've already started to tweak diet a little bit and you're like, oh, I'm not eating all highly processed foods, right? Oh, I know I should move my body, right? If you're doing those things already, you probably are ready for somebody who knows more to guide you through that process. And of course, like, you can do it yourself, right? It is possible. I did it myself, but I will tell you, it took so much longer, like many, many years longer. And also, the thing that ultimately led me to feeling as good as I do now was ultimately going through with all the education and training I did and starting to work with other women. So like, I became the expert I needed, right? And that's ultimately what sealed the deal for me. So just be aware that if you want to try to do it yourself, first of all, like, you really got to be committed to learning. I'm sorry, watching videos on social media, that's not actual research, my friends. Like, it drives me bonkers when people are like, I have researched this. People who fight me in the comments about, like, when I'm giving information on a particular supplement and saying there are risks and it might not work for you. And they're like, I did my research. I'm like, did you? I think you just watched videos. Like, that's not research, friends.
And it's so true. And you just touched on the subject about not just because something is quote unquote natural, that it's going to work for you. And the dosage, dosages are huge, like it cannot work for you. And you put yourself on a high dosage, you're going to damage yourself. And people don't quite understand that.
Yes. No.
So where do you go when you see that natural label on something and you're like, okay, well, I'm going to start here. Do you take a small dosage of it and try it that way? Or do you just say, I'm not going to touch it all. I'm going to find a holistic practitioner that knows what the hell they're talking about?
Yeah, it's a good question. And what I would say is, if you're going to venture down the road of trying something yourself, please actually do some research. So there's a fantastic website database called PubMed. And literally PUBMED, you can put it in any search engine, it'll take you there. And this pulls all different kinds of studies, right? Studies that have been peer reviewed. Now, I want to say something about this. You are only going to have studies on things that somebody at some point can financially gain from, because somebody has to pay for the study, right? So there are some things that we know in kind of the functional medicine world, in the holistic healing world, because we have had it passed down through generations, right? And through these traditional cultures where like it really did work and change things. And we have great anecdotal evidence that may never be studied, right? Or may never be studied thoroughly enough. However, I think if you are just somebody who doesn't have specific training or education in this, and you want to know, should I take this supplement? You should get on PubMed and look it up, right? Like, and a great example is kind of this recent craze that's come up and that we'll be touching on around berberine. It's like, there are tons of studies actually on berberine. You could go on PubMed, type in berberine and whatever your health condition is and see what comes up. And what you want to look for is, in the study, first of all, who funded it, right? Is it somebody who's only getting financial gain from it? That's a good thing to look at. And then you want to look at the outcomes, right? There's always a conclusion section. And usually in there, they recognize like, oh, we can't really, say that much happened because of this in this study, or it looks really promising. And then you might look and see what's the dosage that they're recommending, right? And what was the dosage they used in the study? And that might be somewhere for you to kind of start to get some understanding. And then, yes, typically with a lot of supplements, you want to make sure your body's going to respond to it. And so starting lower, go low and slow is kind of the way we say it. Starting lower, right? Seeing how your body responds. If you have any negative side effects, you stop immediately, friends. And I have a lot of people ask me about like, well, what about die off, right? In the case that you're taking something that has antimicrobial or antiviral properties. And so you can experience a phenomenon called die-off or herxing. It's called a healing reaction sometimes. And it's like, you can see an intensification of certain symptoms. Like you might see, with something that's antibacterial, you might see your skin break out, right? You might see, you have like really loose stools for a little bit. You might see really bad gas or bloating, right? Sometimes these things can be a healing reaction in quotes, but a lot of times it's you're moving too fast or it's not right for you. And if somebody's doing this by themselves, I always err on the side of caution, which means go to the, it's not right for you. And if you want to explore using it, that's when make sure that you seek out somebody to support you and just understand that like any one supplement is just one supplement. It's not going to solve the problem. Just like any one medication really doesn't solve a problem, right? Long term. It can be a Band-Aid. It can help with something potentially. It can be beneficial maybe at the beginning of starting a process because you need some momentum. But there is no supplement where like, just take this and it's going to solve whatever issue you have.
Now, you had touched on the subject of with somebody you're working with going into the doctor and they just like completely disregarded what she was saying about working with you. Mm-hmm. When do you think Western medicine is going to finally say, hey, you know what? We kind of do have to start working together with all of this and start recognizing that some of this stuff may work where a pharmaceutical is not going to work?
Gosh, I wish I could tell you. And here's the thing is like, and this may sound cynical, but this comes from years of personal experience and also what I've experienced through a lot of my clients, which is Western medicine is a business, right? And it's like, here's the thing. No one goes into that field because they're like, I want to make money with pharmaceutical companies, at least for the most part, right? Like, I don't know anybody who's become a doctor or a nurse or something like that and been like, I'm here just to be part of this money-making machine. No, they go into it because they genuinely want to help usually. And the problem is that the whole system is set up, including the origination of their education. You can look back on this historically if you really want to go down a rabbit hole, but it's all funded by people who can benefit from them prescribing medications and making billions of dollars doing so, which is very true. So there's probably always going to be to some extent, unless somehow there's a major shift in how, the world works and pharmaceutical companies have a ceiling at which they can only make a certain amount, right? I don't think we'll ever be in a situation where Western medicine is like, yeah, absolutely. These alternative and natural treatments are just as valid. Now, I will say in the course of doing what I do, I have seen some change like individually, right? With certain individual practitioners who at least are saying to a patient, like, I don't know, right? There might be, right? You might, we probably should do this medication. And you might also think about looking into this, right? So we're seeing a little bit more of that, but it's still so far behind what truly is needed in order to help more people be less sick.
Now, one thing I saw, which actually caught my attention for you in your video, is your explanation of pharmaceuticals versus the natural alternatives as being signaling proper organ function over forced organ function. Can you explain what that difference is?
Yeah, totally. And that's not necessarily every comparison of a supplement to a pharmaceutical, but that is especially valid for things like what's going on with the semaglutide, like Ozempic versus something like berberine, right? There are a lot of medications that stop a whole or try to stop a whole function or push your body to do something that it's not naturally wanting to do on its own. And when the body's in that situation, there's a reason it's doing that, like always. I can't think of a situation where a body is doing something like that. There's probably rare exceptions, of course, to everything. But for the most part, even a great example is like people with high blood pressure. It's like, there's something going on with your mineral balance. There's something going on with nutrient absorption, right? Those are all things we need to look at. So, there's kind of this difference between, I think, like using brute force to try to get the body to change something it's doing that frankly is so far down the path of where the original issue happened versus potentially using a supplement as a part of a whole process where you're coming in and you're giving the body more of what it needed from the start, right? So it's kind of like we're starting at the beginning of the book instead of like going in at chapter 7 out of 10 and hoping that's going to solve everything from chapter 1 to 7 too.
Now, we just brought up the berberine a couple times, so let's hit that subject because that is how I found you. The differences between the semaglutides and the holistics, the metformin and the berberine, the Gymnema, and for glucose metabolism. Where do you start with all of those? Because berberine's the new it thing right now. Everybody's on the berberine right now.
Yeah, it really is. Like, wow, the overwhelm of comments I have on this and questions coming in. So here's the thing. Berberine in particular actually is quite a strong supplement. And it's strong because it does a lot of really, really difficult things is what I would say. So it does have antimicrobial, antiviral, antifungal functions that impact the organism balance in your gut and in your whole body. It also has this ability to help resensitize cells to insulin. Insulin is really important because it is like the key that unlocks the door for your cells that allows glucose, quick energy source into your cells. All of your cells need it. Like there's no world in which your cells don't need glucose. They all need it. It's so important that your body actually has processes to make its own glucose if you're not eating it, which is part of why these diets that are extremely low carb are problematic and place more stress on the body because you're demanding the body make something that it wants to get from your diet. So what happens is in many bodies where there's a chronic hormone issue, where there's a chronic blood sugar dysregulation issue, and by the way, those two things travel together, my friends, because when you have something going on with one hormone, it's affecting all the other hormones. It's a whole system. They all work together. And there are probably some hormones that are impacted more or less, but they all are influenced if one hormone is dysfunctioning a lot, right? So when that's happening, right, we have bodies, especially in today's world, with a lot of us who have been through chronic dieting or extreme exercise or very high stress, because when you have very high stress, that changes how blood sugar regulation works. So if you have a lot of these things going on, your cell no longer is as sensitive to that unlocking mechanism that insulin has. Like insulin has to work really hard to unlock that door, right? So it becomes problematic because we really want our cells to be super sensitive and unlock that door very easily. So something like berberine can, in some bodies, help to take the gunk out of that lock, right? So that lock now works easier, insulin can unlock it, and glucose can easily get in. And, there's a lot we still don't know about berberine. Like that's what we think is happening, right? Based on how bodies respond. We don't actually technically know. Empirically is what I would say. And, berberine is most similar to a drug metformin that you mentioned. So metformin helps to resensitize cells to insulin. So resensitize cells, help them kind of clean out the lock so that insulin can unlock the door for the cells easier again. So those two are more similar than really berberine being compared to, frankly, anything else. There are drawbacks and benefits to metformin and berberine. And, metformin is known for depleting a number of really critical nutrients, ironically, nutrients that are critical for blood sugar regulation. So it's really interesting, right, that the fix also is part of the problem, right, in that case. And I would say from that standpoint, with something like berberine, we don't have as many potential drawbacks. However, there are some bodies that really, really don't respond well to berberine. It's very dangerous for them. They become very ill. Or they just have kind of these prolonged symptoms that continue on, or you're not actually a candidate for it. So people who are a candidate for berberine typically are going to be people who have higher insulin, higher fasting blood glucose. Many women are not sustaining higher blood glucose. Actually, a lot of women that I see in my practice are dipping too low. They have chronic low blood sugar. And it's actually the space between low blood sugar to even what might register as moderate blood sugar. It's that space between and that journey up and down that creates a lot of inflammation and stress on the body. And so if you're somebody who's hanging low and you take something like berberine, that's not going to solve the problem. That could make it worse. So there are a lot of drawbacks that people just are not aware of, don't talk about. And people get mad at me for not saying directly, like, you should take this, definitely, because there is so much nuance to this. It's like going to a mechanic, right, with your blow dryer and saying, just fix this. And they're like, I don't know if I have the parts your blow dryer needs. I don't know if I know how to fix a blow dryer, right? Like there's so much nuance here.
And all of these new buzzwords are hitting everybody at the same time too. Yeah. Another one you just mentioned, cortisol. Cortisol is a huge buzzword right now too. How do you deal with the cortisol issue when everybody comes at you saying, oh, well, my cortisol is high. I'm so stressed out.
Yeah, totally. I hear it all the time. By the way, you're so right. People are always like, I know my cortisol is high. And I'm like, how do you know? Right? Like, how do we know? Or I hear people who are like, I have adrenal fatigue. That's another one, which relates to kind of, oh, I have very low cortisol is what they're trying to say. So here's the thing. Cortisol it's really one of the primary hormones we think about when we think about fight or flight, right? So like something happening and your body needs to quick go into survival mode. There's a bear or a metaphorical bear, right? Somebody yelling at you, some major thing happening at work, something like that. And your body's like, I need to immediately respond. And your body releases cortisol. And the purpose of releasing cortisol is actually to speed up a number of things and shut down or slow down a number of things that are no longer a priority, such as digestion. Not a priority if you need to run from a bear, right? What's a priority? You need to run from a bear. We need your pulse to quicken. We need you to take in more oxygen, right? Like we need you to be able to have faster reflexes, move quickly, right? Those are all really important. Digestion, not important. Your fertility, your cycle regulating, absolutely not important. If you don't survive this bear attack, you're never going to have a baby anyways, right?
It's a great example.
So it's like, a lot of us in our culture, especially a lot of women, we are living in states where we're chronically stressed, right? Where there's a bear that shows up every day. And eventually after a bear showing up every day, it feels like the bear's never leaving, right? And you're just living with a bear now and trying to keep yourself safe. And so that's where cortisol kind of comes in as being really problematic. And what eventually happens over time, I see in a lot of women's bodies, is actually not necessarily that their cortisol is high, it's that it's dysregulated. So kind of like I was saying about that blood sugar piece where like a lot of women tend to actually hang lower and it's them going low to moderate, that can create a lot of inflammation and stress. That can happen with cortisol too, where actually your body has it's like on the fritz, right? The kind of connections aren't working as well. And so like your cortisol will be high at a time of day where it shouldn't be high, like the evening. Cortisol should be highest in the morning. It's part of what helps you wake up, works in opposition to hormones that help us go to sleep, like melatonin that should be coming in the evening. So a lot of times what happens is women will have higher cortisol in the evening. And then they'll have low cortisol in the morning. And so what I tend to see is that it's pretty rare that women across the board have purely high cortisol, unless we've caught you in like your first or one of your first very acute stress situations. What tends to just happen is that it's dysregulated. It's high at the wrong times. It's low at the wrong times. And the problem with that is it adds more stress on your system. It slows down certain processes. And if that's happening chronically, that's going to dysregulate a lot of things related to your hormones, which if you are somebody with female physiology, hormones are everything and hormones connect to everything. Your hormones and your gut health, they are the pair that we have to focus on and that influence literally everything. So if those things are being impacted, which they are when we have these kind of cortisol levels going up and down and all around, you're going to experience side effects. You're going to experience different symptoms. You're not going to feel really great. But the fix, by the way, is not, oh, I need to just take a supplement for this high cortisol. That's actually not the fix. And a lot of times women will take a supplement. And a great example is like ashwagandha. Have you heard of that one?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So ashwagandha is one that you'll hear a lot. And people on, social media who don't know as much will be like, you should just take ashwagandha. You have high cortisol, take ashwagandha. Well, here's the thing. Ashwagandha in some bodies, they don't respond in the way that you're hoping they respond. And in bodies that have this dysregulation and not necessarily pure high all the time, we actually can then take them very, very low. Very low. And so it can have a lot of negative drawbacks. So this is where it's like, it's very nuanced, right? Mm-hmm. And no one wants to hear that, but it's the truth. And truly the best thing you can do for cortisol dysregulation, for blood sugar dysregulation, for thyroid hormone dysregulation, for a messed up cycle, for trouble with perimenopause, the best thing that you can do is eat frequently enough, but not too frequently, to eat balanced meals with high quality animal protein, with gluten-free carbs, with non-starchy veggies, with healthy fats, often enough throughout the day. It's your very best friend, the very best, most basic way you have to signal to your body, hey, you're safe, and make sure you're sleeping. Those two things can help to reduce a lot of issues. It may not solve the whole problem because you might be a little too far down that rabbit hole, but it can make a lot of things better.
The next supplement that everybody is telling women they need is the collagen supplement. Of course, the $100 collagen supplement that is going to erase all of your wrinkles and is going to make your metabolism fine. What do you say about that?
Oh my gosh. So this is like, you're asking really good questions and lots of cans of worms here. So I'm being a little long-winded, but
no, keep going.
So
because we want to hear it.
Right, totally. So collagen's really interesting. So a couple of things is there's a really major issue with collagen supplements, especially coming from land animals like cows, which is the most common source, and exposure to an herbicide called glyphosate. And glyphosate is something we've introduced into the food system, coincidentally, in the 90s too. And we see at the same time a great rise in autoimmune conditions as the introduction of glyphosate, aka Roundup, into the food system. So we can't technically say that it caused autoimmune issues, right? We just know it traveled together and it's probably part of what's made things worse. And what happens is in mammals, we sequester these kinds of dangerous toxins and substances in joint tissue. So you're eating the joint tissue of an animal. So if that animal has not been grass-fed, grass-finished, if the company's not testing their collagen for glyphosate, which they should be, that's a problem. So those are two huge red flags. And I see a lot of these multi-level marketing companies and, more major companies trying to mainstream collagen who are not doing those two things. And that makes it so that the collagen you're consuming is potentially ultimately poisonous to you. And what happens is that then your joint tissue and your connective tissue is now taking in this dysfunctional set of amino acids. So that's a problem. The next problem is collagen is not a complete protein. And I see a lot of women relying on collagen as a dietary protein source, like scoops and scoops and scoops. Mm-hmm. And it is something when I'm helping a woman transition from a vegan diet to like one with animal proteins, it's something we'll use, right? It is something I'll sometimes use therapeutically with clients. It can have some benefits to helping heal your gut. It can have some benefits for, right, connective tissues, ligaments, joints, things like that, if it's good quality. But it also can feed and fuel certain kinds of bacteria. So because it's an incomplete protein, there's certain kinds of bacteria that love to eat it. It's very easy for it to digest. So if you do mounds and mounds of it, you could be fueling more imbalances in your gut and in your system over time. So it's really not kind of this like another cure-all, another great for everyone. And in fact, if you're looking for benefits related to skin, you certainly could explore trying it, but there's some reason to think that like taking it, orally in a powder form is not necessarily going to give us like these astounding results when it comes to like skin in the way that frankly, like a really good anti-inflammatory diet, being really well hydrated with less toxic water, aka properly filtering your water, right? Getting sleep, like those are the things. And people always comment on my skin, by the way, like always. And I have good skin, not because I'm downing collagen all day, every day. Do I use collagen occasionally? I do. Not every day, not even close. So like there are these basic tenets that are going to give you healthier skin. And it's rarely, kind of this magic, just take this supplement.
Well, I brought that up because a lot of people are pushing the collagen, but you'll see, especially on TikTok, I just saw it yesterday where a woman will put two pictures up and she's got a dark shadowy picture versus a light right up against her face. And she's like, look, there's no wrinkles.
Totally. No. And with those, I'm always wondering, and this happens with a lot of dietary approaches. So people will come for me when I say like, we need to eat carbohydrates, right? Like we need them. People will be like, well, how come when I went keto, I finally got pregnant? And I'm like, well, hang on. What else did you do? Because is it the going keto or was it the fact that you went from eating fast food and highly processed foods and a lot of inflammatory oils and a lot of gluten and a lot of synthetic ingredients to now you're eating like whole food dairy and now you're eating like meat and now you're eating, right, kind of these like straightforward ingredients that are going to be healthier for your body anyways. It's the same thing with these before and after pictures. I always want to be like, well, hang on. I want to see like a full list of like, what was your life like before? What were you doing? And what are you doing now? Because usually when we make one health conscious choice, we are more excited to make other health conscious choices.
Now, that was something that you brought up with the collagen, is that there are so many different additives, and the Roundup was a part of the issue. Mm-hmm. That is also the problem that I'm hearing with the carbohydrates, with the wheat we're using and the flour we're using that are in the breads that we consume and the pastas we consume.
Yeah. I will say I like to say this, and maybe I am more dogmatic than I think. I'm not super dogmatic about a lot, but I am about gluten. I don't think there is a woman in the Western world who can't benefit at least from a period of time of removing gluten. Mm-hmm. If you're somebody who lives in a country where you don't mess up gluten as much as we have here. So we've changed the proportion of gluten. It's the sticky protein in it. So we've changed the proportion of it in the United States. We also have sprayed it to the dickens with all kinds of things that are detrimental, right? And that are truly known carcinogens, known toxins to the body. So that's not me being propagandist or making things up. It's real, right? So we've done a lot of that. And so because of that, I would say in the United States, especially, most women can benefit from pulling gluten out entirely. And if you feel really good, you might incorporate some of it sometimes. That's like sourdough version, right? Something fermented or something higher quality ingredient. But in general, it should not be a mainstay in anybody's diet in the Western world. If you live somewhere like Italy, where they're taking better care of the grain and you feel really good and you don't have symptoms of any kind of disease, and I mean that drastically, you don't have symptoms of any kind of disease, right? Then you might consider it something that could be a regular part of your diet. But we really underestimate the impact gluten has, just based on particularly the sheer mechanisms in gluten. So yes, we've done all these things to make gluten different and impact our body in a toxic way. But gluten itself, no matter where the gluten comes from, by the way, gluten in Italy, gluten in the US, gluten in Mexico, wherever gluten might be, gluten in Australia, right? Gluten triggers the release of something called zonulin. And zonulin tells the junctions in your intestines to relax and create space. That is leaky gut. That is intestinal permeability. That action happens in every single body. So it's just a question of what other things are impacting and affecting the gut that could be making that worse or making that problematic for your body. But we need to know that that happens in every body.
That is absolutely amazing. And you have given us so much information that I think we're all going to have to process it.
Yes.
Now, where can people find you on social media to follow you? Because I am actually going to put all the links for your courses and getting in touch with you personally on the podcast itself.
Fantastic.
But where can people follow all of your social media?
Yeah. So I am at Marisa Faye Wellness. That's Marisa Faye Wellness on Instagram, on TikTok. You can also find me at marisafaye.com. My website has been getting redone for months, but I think it will be redone soon. I'm manifesting it. And I have a free training that people can check out at bit.ly/hormone training. And I just recommend that, like, if any of this sparked more questions for you, or you're like, I want to hear more about, like, how do supplements fit into this? Or like, where should I start? That free training is a great place to start. It's over an hour long. So apparently I don't know how to under deliver. So I'm over delivering. But I would
never a bad thing. Okay?
Right. But I'd highly recommend checking that out, especially if you're curious about anything that I said today.
Marisa, thank you so much for your time. And I'm sure you have so many clients that you have to see today. And I'm probably going to deliver some more to you after this podcast.
Please do.
Absolutely. And I hope to have you on sometime in the future again to talk more about some of these things that we've talked about today.
Yeah, absolutely. I would love that. Thank you for having me.
No, thank you. I'm Tatiana Ryan. This is the Businessy Podcast. I will link everything that Marisa has talked about with getting in touch with her at the podcast itself. So you'll be able to go right down directly and be able to get in touch with her. Thank you guys all for listening. I'm Tatiana Ryan. This is the Businessy Podcast.